Welcome back to Dark Horror Stories. In today's episode, I'm sharing 10 disturbing stories from remote motels scattered across forgotten highways and back roads. These are tales of travelers who sought shelter for the night and found something waiting in the dark. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button and let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Story 1. The Starlight Motor Lodge sat about 40 miles outside of Bend, Oregon, right where Highway 97 starts climbing into empty country. I'd driven past it maybe a dozen times over the years, always during the day, and it always looked like the kind of place that was probably abandoned but somehow was. The neon sign out front had been broken for as long as I could remember, with only the scent and light still flickering in pale blue whenever the wind hit it right. I ended up there on a Tuesday in late March, or maybe it was a Wednesday. The days had been blurring together since I'd taken this job doing equipment maintenance for cell towers scattered across central Oregon. Long drives between sites, cheap motels, terrible coffee from gas stations. I was supposed to make it to Burns that night, but a storm rolled in around 6, the kind that turns the road into a gray tunnel where you can barely see past your hood. My windshield wipers were squeaking, needed replacing for months, and I'd been putting it off the way you put off a lot of things when you're living out of your truck. The starlight appeared through the rain like something I'd conjured just by needing it. I almost missed the turnoff. Pulled into a gravel lot with maybe 8 rooms in an L shape, all of them dark except for the office. The building was that specific shade of turquoise that motels seemed to favor in the 70s, faded now to something closer to gray-green. Paint peeling around the door frames. A rusted ice machine squatting near room 4. The kid working the desk couldn't have been more than 19. Thin face, Adam's apple that bobbed when he swallowed, name tag that said PHILLIB in crooked letters. He seemed surprised to see me, like maybe I was the first guest they'd had in weeks. Probably was, given the layer of dust on the counter. Just need a room for the night, I told him. Heading out early? Philip nodded, sliding a key across the counter. Actual key, not a card, attached to a diamond-shaped piece of green plastic with 7 stamped into it. That'll be $42. Check out S at 10, but honestly you can take your time, we're not exactly busy. The room smelled like old carpet and something floral that couldn't quite cover the underlying scent of mildew. Queen bed with a comforter that had probably been beige once. Nightstand with a phone that looked like it hadn't worked since 1987. Small television bolted to the dresser. Bathroom with a strip of paper across the toilet seat claiming it had been sanitized. I'd stayed in worse. I grabbed my duffel from the truck, thought about getting dinner somewhere, but the rain was coming down harder now, hammering against the roof in waves. Had a protein bar and a warm Coke in my bag. That would do. I took a shower that fluctuated between scalding and lukewarm, changed into sweatpants and a t-shirt, settled onto the bed with my phone to check tomorrow's route. That's when I noticed the scratching, soft at first. So soft I told myself it was just tree branches against the building, even though I couldn't remember seeing any trees that close to the rooms. It came from the wall behind the headboard, a rhythmic sound like fingernails dragging across drywall. Scratch, scratch, pause, scratch, scratch, pause. I stood up, pressed my ear to the wall. Room 6 was on the other side, and I was pretty sure I'd been the only guest. The parking lot had been empty except for my truck and an old Honda that probably belonged to Philip. The scratching stopped. I waited there for maybe 3 minutes, feeling stupid, my cheek against the cold wallpaper. Floral pattern, roses and thorns, nothing. Just the rain and the wind and the occasional rattle of the air conditioning unit under the window. I got back in bed, tried to focus on my phone, scrolling through nothing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I should have heard something from room 6. A TV, footsteps, a toilet flushing, any sound at all to explain what I'd heard. Around midnight, I turned off the lights. The room went dark except for the faint glow seeping through the curtains from the parking lot. I'd almost drifted off when the phone rang. That harsh, rattling bell sound that old phones make. I jerked upright, heart suddenly pounding, and stared at it in the dark. 4 rings, 5. I reached over and picked it up, static, thick and heavy with something underneath it, something that might have been breathing. "Hello!" My voice came out rougher than I'd intended. The breathing got louder, definitely breathing. Slow and wet, like someone with a chest cold trying to draw air through fluid. I hung up. My mouth had gone dry, that specific dryness you get when your body knows something's wrong before your brain catches up. I told myself it was just crossed wires, old equipment, maybe even Philip screwing around because he was bored. But my hand was shaking when I set the receiver back in its cradle. The scratching started again, louder this time, not just fingernails anymore. It sounded like something digging, like nails raking down through layers of drywall and insulation, working methodically from one spot. The sound moved slowly across the wall, starting behind the headboard and traveling toward the bathroom. I turned on the bedside lamp. The scratching continued, unbothered by the light. I could almost feel it through the wall, vibrations traveling through the cheap construction into the bed frame. I pulled on my jeans, grabbed my keys, and went to the door. I don't know what I was planning to do. Knock on room 6 maybe, or go to the office and complain. But when I opened the door and stepped into the rain, I saw something that made me forget about knocking. Room 6's door was open, just slightly, maybe an inch, enough to show darkness beyond. No lights, no movement, but the door was definitely open, swaying gently in the wind. I should have gotten in my truck right then. Looking back, that's what anyone sensible would have done. Instead, I walked over to room 6, my sneakers squelching in puddles, rain soaking through my shirt. I pushed the door open wider. The room was empty, not just unoccupied, but completely bare. No bed, no dresser, no nightstand, just stained carpet and walls marked with dark patches where furniture used to be. The bathroom door hung open, revealing cracked tiles and a rust-stained sink. But the wallpaper. Jesus, the wallpaper on the wall adjacent to my room. It had been shredded. Long vertical gouges running from about chest height all the way down to the baseboards, the floral pattern torn into ribbons that curled away from the wall. And the drywall underneath was scored deep, grooves cut into it in parallel lines, 4 of them evenly spaced like fingers. I backed out of the room, pulled the door shut, and walked quickly back to room 7. The scratching had stopped. I locked my door, dragged the chair from the corner, and wedged it under the handle. Sat on the edge of the bed with my keys in my fist and waited for morning. Around 3 a.m., I heard footsteps in the gravel outside. Slow, deliberate steps that moved from the office toward my room. They stopped right outside my door. I held my breath, watching the thin line of light at the bottom of the door, waiting for a shadow to interrupt it. The doorknob turned, slowly testing the lock. It rattled once, twice, then stopped. The footsteps moved away, crunching back across the gravel toward the office. I heard a door open and close. Then silence. I didn't sleep. Just sat there watching the door, listening to the rain slowly taper off to a drizzle as gray dawn light started seeping through the curtains. At 6 a.m., I packed my bag, checked the parking lot through the window, still just my truck and the Honda. I opened my door carefully, expecting to see something waiting. Nothing, just wet gravel and that sad, peeling turquoise paint. The office was locked. A handwritten sign in the window said back at 9 a.m. I left the key on the doorstep and got in my truck. I was pulling out when I glanced in my rearview mirror and saw Philip standing in the window of room 6, not in the office. Room 6, the empty room with the shredded wall. He was just standing there completely still, watching me leave. I drove straight through to Burns without stopping. A week later, I was telling the story to my supervisor, trying to make it sound funny, like a weird experience rather than something that still woke me up at night. He got quiet, then pulled up something on his computer and turned the screen toward me. It was a news article from 2019. The Starlight Motor Lodge. A maintenance worker named Philip Garza had been found dead in room 6, apparently deceased for several days before anyone noticed. The article mentioned that he'd been living in the motel, that the owners had let him stay rent-free in exchange for running the desk. The photo they'd used showed a thin kid with a prominent Adam's apple, wearing a crooked name tag. I still drive Highway 97 for work, but I don't stop at the Starlight anymore. Last time I passed it, around 2 in the afternoon, I saw the door to room 6 hanging open. And I could swear, even from the road, I could see someone standing just inside, watching the highway, waiting for the next guest, who doesn't know any better than to stop. Story 2. My sister Brenna got married at a vineyard outside of Walla Walla, one of those expensive destination weddings where half the guests fly in and everyone pretends they're having the time of their lives. I'd driven up from Sacramento, took 2 days off work, and the whole trip felt like something I was obligated to do rather than something I wanted to do. Brenna and I had never been particularly close. The wedding was fine. The reception was fine. But by 10 p.m., I was exhausted from making small talk with relatives I barely knew, and I decided to head to my motel early rather than wait for the send-off. I booked a room at the Desert Rose Inn, about 20 minutes from the vineyard, right off Highway 12. Seemed decent enough in the photos online. Clean sheets, free coffee, reasonable price. The drive took me through rolling hills covered in vineyards, then into flatter country where the landscape turned dry and sparse. The Desert Rose appeared suddenly on my right, a low building with maybe 10 units painted desert tan with orange trim. The vacancy sign was lit, buzzing slightly in the warm night air. A woman in her 60s checked me in, reading glasses on a chain around her neck, cardigan despite the heat. She had me fill out a paper form with a pen that barely worked, gave me a key to room 3, and told me breakfast was from 7 to 9 in the main office. "Quiet night," she said, smiling. "You'll sleep well." Room 3 was at the end of the building, farthest from the office. I parked directly in front, grabbed my overnight bag, and let myself in. The room had that generic motel smell, a mixture of cleaning products and air that had been recycled through the same AC unit for 20 years. 2 double beds with matching floral bedspreads. A painting of a desert sunset bolted to the wall. Bathroom with one of those fans that sounds like a helicopter. I changed into shorts and a tank top, washed my face, and was about to get into bed when I heard singing. A woman's voice, soft and melodic, coming from somewhere outside. I went to the window, pulled the curtain aside, and looked out into the parking lot. Empty. The voice continued, singing something slow and mournful that I didn't recognize. Not English, maybe. The melody rose and fell in a way that made my chest feel tight. I told myself it was coming from one of the other rooms, sound carrying in the still night air. But it sounded close, really close, like it was coming from just beyond my door. I opened the door and stepped out onto the walkway. The singing stopped immediately. The parking lot stretched out in front of me, empty under a single flickering light pole. To my left, rooms 1 and 2 sat dark and quiet. To my right, just the end of the building and a dumpster enclosure. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. Otherwise, nothing. I went back inside, locked the door, made sure the deadbolt was engaged, told myself I was being paranoid. Too much wine at the reception, too many hours on the road. I climbed into bed and turned off the light. The singing started again around 1 a.m. This time I was sure it was coming from inside the room. Not from the bathroom or the closet, but from the space between the 2 beds. I lay there in the dark, my eyes adjusting enough to make out the shapes of furniture, that empty space where the nightstand sat. The voice was clearer now. Definitely a woman singing in a language I didn't understand. The melody was beautiful and sad, like a lullaby sung for someone who wouldn't wake up. I wanted to turn on the light, but something stopped me. Some animal part of my brain that knew moving would be a mistake. I heard fabric rustling. the soft sound of something shifting against carpet. Then I felt the bed move slightly, like someone had sat down on the very edge of the other bed, the one I wasn't in. My heart was hammering so hard I thought I might actually pass out. I kept my eyes closed, or maybe they were open. I honestly couldn't tell anymore in the dark. The singing continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then it stopped. The silence was worse. I counted to 60 in my head, trying to breathe quietly, listening for any sound that would tell me I was alone again. Nothing, just the hum of the AC and my own pulse in my ears. I finally worked up the courage to reach for the lamp. My hand shook so badly I almost knocked it over. When the light came on, the room was empty. Both beds looked exactly as they had before. Nothing disturbed, nothing out of place. Except there was something on the nightstand between the beds. A small photograph in a tarnished silver frame. It showed a young woman in a dress from maybe the 1940s, standing in front of a building I didn't recognize. She was smiling, but there was something sad about her eyes. Written on the back in faded ink, Rosa, 1947. I didn't touch it. I didn't want to touch it. That photograph hadn't been there when I checked in. I was certain of that. I'd set my phone on that nightstand, and it had been empty except for an alarm clock and a hotel services binder. I grabbed my bag, didn't bother changing out of my sleep clothes, and walked out to my car. It was almost 3 a.m. The office was dark. I sat in my car with the doors locked and waited for dawn. When the sun finally came up, I went back to the room to grab my phone charger. The photograph was gone. The nightstand was empty again, just the alarm clock and the binder, exactly as I'd expected to find it the night before. I dropped the key through the mail slot in the office door and drove back to Sacramento without stopping for breakfast. 3 months later, I was looking through some family photos at my mom's house, boxes of old pictures she'd been meaning to organize for years. I found one that made my hands go cold. A black and white photo of a woman in a 1940s dress standing in front of a building with Desert Rose Motor Court painted on the side. The same woman from the photograph in my room, the same sad smile. I asked my mom about it. She said it was her Aunt Rosa, her father's sister, who died young. Some kind of accident at a motel she'd been working at in Washington. She couldn't remember the details, just that it had been tragic and the family didn't like to talk about it. I never told Brenna about that night, never told anyone really until now. But sometimes late at night when I can't sleep, I hear that singing again in my head, that beautiful, mournful melody. And I wonder if Rosa is still there in room 3, singing to guests who stop for the night, waiting for someone who understands her song. Story 3. The Ponderosa Motor Inn wasn't my first choice, wasn't even my second, but it was past midnight. I'd been driving since 5 a.m., and every other place in Elko had their no vacancy signs lit up. Some kind of mining convention in town, the guy at the Shell station told me. I was lucky the Ponderosa had anything available at all. Lucky. That's the word I used. The place was about 3 miles outside of town, sitting by itself on a stretch of road that didn't seem to lead anywhere important. Single story, maybe 15 rooms, with a gravel parking lot and a sign out front that had definitely seen better days. One of those old motor courts from the 50s that somehow kept limping along. The man who checked me in was maybe 70, with thick glasses and hearing aids in both ears. He had me say my name 3 times before he got it written down correctly. Grant Ashford, room 11. $75, cash only, because the card machine had been broken for a month. Quiet night, he said, handing me a key. You'll probably be the only guest. Room 11 was at the far end of the building, as far from the office as you could get. I parked in front and hauled my suitcase inside. The room was actually cleaner than I'd expected. Dated, sure, with that brown and orange color scheme that screamed 1975, but the sheets looked fresh and the carpet didn't have any suspicious stains. I was too tired to care much either way. Brushed my teeth, set an alarm for 6 a.m. and was asleep within minutes of hitting the pillow. I don't know what woke me up. One of those things where you're suddenly conscious but you're not sure why. The room was dark except for a thin line of light coming from the bathroom. I'd left the door cracked and the light on, a habit from childhood that I'd never shaken. I lay there listening. Something had woken me, but I couldn't identify what. Then I heard it, a sound like something being dragged across the floor. Slow and heavy, coming from outside my room. It stopped, then started again, rhythmic, deliberate. I got up and went to the window, pulled back the curtain just enough to see out. The parking lot was empty except for my car. The light over the office was still on, and I could see the old man through the window, sitting at the desk, his head bent over something I couldn't make out. The dragging sound came again, closer now. I realized it was coming from the walkway right outside my door. Something heavy being pulled along the concrete. I checked the peephole. Nothing, just darkness and the faint glow from the parking lot light, but I could hear it clearly now right outside. Drag, pause, moving slowly past my door toward the end of the building. I waited until the sound faded, then unlocked my door and opened it carefully. The walkway was empty, but there was something on the concrete. A wet trail glistening in the dim light, leading from room 9 down past my room toward room 13 at the end. It looked like water at first. Then I got closer and realized it was too thick, too dark. I followed the trail with my eyes to where it disappeared around the corner. Then I saw the door to room 13. It was open, not all the way, just enough to show darkness beyond. I should have gone back to my room. Should have locked the door and minded my own business. Instead, I walked down the walkway, following that wet trail until I was standing in front of room 13. The smell hit me before I could see inside, something organic and wrong, like meat left out in the sun for days. I pulled my shirt up over my nose and pushed the door open wider. The room was destroyed. The beds had been pushed against the far wall, mattresses torn open with their stuffing pulled out in clumps. The walls were covered in dark stains that I didn't want to examine too closely. And in the center of the room, something had been arranged on the floor. It took me a moment to understand what I was looking at. Clothes. A pile of clothes stacked neatly like someone had folded laundry and left it there. But there was something underneath the clothes, something that gave them shape. I backed out of the room and walked quickly back toward the office. My hands were shaking. The old man was still at the desk, and he looked up when I came in, blinking behind his thick glasses. "Room 13, I said. My voice came out higher than normal. "Something's wrong with room 13. He stared at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he stood up slowly, joints cracking, and came around the desk. He walked past me without a word, heading down the walkway toward the end of the building. I followed him, even though everything in me was screaming to get in my car and leave. He stopped in front of room 13, looked at the open door, then at the wet trail on the concrete. He reached out and pulled the door closed with a soft click. "Room's not for rent," he said quietly. "Hasn't been for years." But the door was open, and there's something inside. Something. "Leak," he interrupted. "Pipes burst last winter, made a mess. Haven't gotten around to fixing it yet." That wasn't what I'd seen. I knew it was. But he was looking at me with an expression that was half apologetic, half warning, and I realized he wasn't going to discuss it further. "You should get some sleep," he said. "Check out S at 10. I went back to room 11, locked the door, and pushed the chair under the handle. I didn't sleep, just sat on the bed, fully dressed, watching the door until gray dawn light started creeping through the curtains. When I checked out at 7 a.m., the old man wasn't at the desk. A younger woman, maybe his daughter, took my key with a bright smile and wished me a safe drive. I almost asked about room 13. Almost. Instead, I walked to my car and glanced down the walkway. Room 13's door was closed. The wet trail was gone, the concrete dry and clean like nothing had been there at all. But as I pulled out of the parking lot, I looked in my rearview mirror and saw something that made my blood go cold. The door to room 13 was open again, and someone was standing in the doorway, mostly hidden in shadow, watching my car disappear down the road. I drove straight through to Reno without stopping, didn't even get gas until I was 100 miles away from Elko. A year later, I was traveling for work again and had to drive through Elko. I thought about stopping at the Ponderosa, maybe in daylight, just to see if it looked as unsettling as I remembered. But when I got to that stretch of road, the motel was gone. Not abandoned, not closed. Gone. Just an empty lot with dead grass and a few pieces of broken concrete where the building used to be. I asked about it at a diner in town. The waitress, a woman in her 40s with tired eyes, said the Ponderosa had burned down about 6 months ago. Old wiring probably. The owner died in the fire. Didn't even try to get out, she said, like he was waiting for it. I still think about that pile of clothes in room 13, about what gave them shape, about the wet trail and the dragging sound and the figure watching me leave. Sometimes I wonder if the old man knew what was in that room all along, if he'd been keeping the door closed for years, trying to contain something that wouldn't stay contained. I don't stay in small motels anymore. Even when every chain hotel is booked, even when I'm exhausted and desperate for a bed, I keep driving until I find something with a corporate logo and a functional website. It's not rational, probably, but neither was what I saw that night in Elko. Story 4. I found the Twin Pines Motel by accident, which should have been my first warning. I'd been heading to Helena on Highway 12, taking the scenic route through Montana because I had time and the weather was good when I missed a turn somewhere around White Sulphur Springs. Ended up on a county road that got narrower and rougher the farther I went until I was seriously considering turning around. That's when I saw the sign. Twin Pines Motel Vacancy, Clean Rooms. It was hand-painted on a piece of plywood, pointing down an even smaller road that disappeared into a stand of lodgepole pines. I glanced at my phone. No signal. I'd lost it about 20 minutes back. The sun was getting low, maybe an hour from setting, and the idea of trying to navigate back to the highway in the dark wasn't appealing. A motel meant a bed, maybe even dinner if they had a restaurant. The road through the pines opened up into a small clearing with a motel that looked like it had been built in the 30s and never updated. 6 tiny cabins arranged in a semicircle around a larger building that I assumed was the office. Each cabin was painted white with green shutters, and sure enough, there were 2 massive pine trees towering over the whole complex. I parked in front of the office and went inside. A bell over the door announced my arrival. The woman behind the counter was probably in her 50s, thin and weathered, with gray hair pulled back in a ponytail. She was reading a paperback western and didn't look up immediately. "Need a room?" she asked, still looking at her book. "If you've got one available." "Cabin 4, $60, cash or check?" I paid cash, and she handed me a key attached to a wooden fob carved in the shape of a pine cone. "Bathrooms in the cabin. There's no restaurant, but there's a vending machine outside with sandwiches and such. Checkouts whenever you leave." Cabin 4 was the second from the left, with a small porch and a screen door that creaked when I opened it. Inside was cramped but clean. Single bed with a quilt that looked handmade, small table with 1 chair, a sink in the corner and a door that led to a bathroom barely big enough to turn around in. The window over the bed looked out into the pines. I could see the other cabins from there, all of them dark except for cabin 1, which had a light on behind closed curtains. Knowing I wasn't completely alone was somehow comforting. I grabbed a shrink-wrapped sandwich from the vending machine, turkey and cheese that tasted like plastic, and settled in for the night. The cabin didn't have a TV, which wasn't surprising, and my phone still had no signal. I read for a while using a book I'd brought, something about the history of western mining towns, until my eyes started getting heavy. I turned off the light around 10. The cabin went pitch black. I hadn't realized how dark it would be without any ambient light from civilization. Even with my eyes adjusted, I could barely make out the shape of the window. That's probably why I noticed the light moving through the trees. It was faint, like a flashlight, bobbing up and down as it moved through the pines behind the cabins. I watched it for a few minutes, trying to figure out what someone would be doing out in the woods at night. Maybe the motel owner, checking on something. But the light kept moving farther away, deeper into the trees, until it was just a faint glow filtering through the branches. I told myself it wasn't my business and rolled over to go to sleep. The knocking woke me up. 3 soft taps on the door, then nothing. I lay there disoriented, trying to figure out what time it was. My phone said 2:47 a.m. No reason for anyone to be knocking on my door at 2:47 in the morning. The knocking came again. 3 taps, evenly spaced, then silence. I got up and went to the door, but I didn't open it. "Yeah, who is it?" No answer. I waited, listening, but all I could hear was the wind moving through the pines. "Hello?" I tried again, nothing. I checked the peephole, but it was too dark outside to see anything. I wasn't about to open the door to empty darkness, so I went back to bed and tried to convince myself it had been a dream. The knocking came again at 3:15, then at 3:42, then at 4:08, always 3 taps, always followed by silence. By the 5th time, I was sitting up in bed with the light on, my hands shaking from adrenaline and exhaustion. When gray dawn light finally started filtering through the window, I got dressed and packed my bag. I was done with this place. The knocking had stopped around 5, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was standing on the other side of my door, waiting. I opened the door carefully, half expecting to see someone on the porch. It was empty, but there was something on the wooden planks in front of the door. Small dark smudges, evenly spaced in groups of 3. I crouched down to look closer. Fingerprints. 3 fingertips pressed into the dust on the porch like someone had been kneeling and reaching up to knock. But the prints were wrong. Too long, the spacing too wide, and there were no other marks. No footprints, no handprints, no sign that anyone had actually been standing there. I grabbed my bag and walked quickly to my car. The office was dark, no sign of the woman from yesterday. I left the key on the counter by the door and got the hell out of there. The drive back to the main highway took maybe 15 minutes, and I must have passed that hand-painted sign without even seeing it. I was just focused on getting back to civilization, to cell service and paved roads and other human beings. A few months later, I tried to find Twin Pines Motel on a map. I wanted to see exactly where I'd been, maybe even look it up online to see if anyone else had experienced something strange there. But I couldn't find it. Scrolled through every road off Highway 12 near White Sulphur Springs, checked satellite imagery, even called the Chamber of Commerce to ask if they'd heard of it. Nothing. No record of a Twin Pines motel anywhere in that area. The woman I spoke to said there had been a motor court out that way back in the 60s, but it had burned down and was never rebuilt. I still have the receipt from the vending machine, crumpled in my wallet, physical proof that I was there, that it was real. Sometimes I take it out and look at it, at the faded logo that says Twin Pines at the top. And sometimes, late at night, I hear 3 soft taps against my bedroom wall. I tell myself it's the house settling, branches against the siding, anything rational, but I can't help counting the rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. Story 5. The Meadowbrook was the kind of motel you see advertised on those faded billboards along I-80, the ones that promise cable TV and air conditioning, like those are luxury features. I'd stopped there because I needed a place to sleep between Des Moines and Omaha, and it was either the Meadowbrook or drive another hour on fumes. It was mid-October, One of those cold autumn evenings where the sun sets early and the wind has teeth. The motel sat at the edge of a town called Harlan, right where farmland starts giving way to absolutely nothing. 2 stories, maybe 20 rooms with an outdoor corridor and stairs at each end. The paint was peeling, the parking lot was cracked, but the vacancy sign was lit. A man with a gray ponytail and a Grateful Dead t-shirt checked me in. He looked like he'd been behind that desk since 1982 and had no plans to leave. "Room 14, he said, sliding a key across the counter. "Upstairs, far end." "Quiet up there." The stairs creaked under my weight as I climbed to the 2nd floor. Room 14 was the last door on the right, facing the parking lot. Inside was what I'd expected: outdated furniture, questionable carpet, a TV from the early 2000s, and a smell like old smoke that no amount of air freshener could cover. I dropped my bag on the bed and went to wash my hands in the bathroom. The water came out rust-colored for the first few seconds, then cleared up. The mirror was spotted with age, and someone had left a hair tie on the counter. I tossed it in the trash. I bought a microwave burrito from a gas station, and I ate it sitting on the bed while watching local news I didn't care about. By 9 p.m., I was ready for sleep. I brushed my teeth, changed into sweatpants, and was about to turn off the light when I heard a door slam somewhere on my floor, loud enough to make me flinch. Then footsteps, heavy and fast, moving along the corridor. They stopped somewhere near my room, and I heard what sounded like someone trying a doorknob, rattling it roughly. Then the footsteps moved on, fading toward the stairs. I got up and looked through the peephole. The corridor was empty, dimly lit by a single bulb. Most of the other rooms looked dark. I figured it was just another guest, maybe drunk, trying to find their room. I turned off the light and got into bed. Around midnight, I heard it again. Footsteps coming up the stairs and moving along the corridor. This time they stopped directly in front of my door. I lay there, staring at the thin line of light at the bottom of the door, and watched as a shadow interrupted it. Someone was standing right outside my room, not moving, not knocking, just standing there. I held my breath, listening. Silence. Then the doorknob turned slowly, testing the lock. It rattled once, twice, then stopped. The shadow moved away, and the footsteps continued down the corridor. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I got up and checked the lock, made sure the chain was engaged. Everything was secure, but I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever was out there wasn't just a confused guest. I tried to go back to sleep, but every sound in the building seemed amplified. Pipes groaning, the wind whistling under the door, the occasional creak of the structure settling. I was finally starting to drift off when I heard tapping on my window. Soft at first, like someone knocking politely. Tap, tap, tap. I sat up, staring at the curtains. My room was on the 2nd floor. There was no balcony, no fire escape outside that window, no reason for anyone to be tapping on it. The tapping came again, a little louder. Tap, tap, tap. I got out of bed and approached the window slowly, my hands shaking. I didn't want to open the curtains, but I could not know what was out there. I pulled the fabric aside just enough to peek through. A face was pressed against the glass. I jerked back, nearly tripping over the chair. The face was pale, too pale, with dark, hollow eyes and a mouth stretched into something that wasn't quite a smile. It was looking directly at me, forehead pressed against the window, breath fogging the glass. I grabbed my phone and fumbled for the light switch. When the room flooded with light, I looked at the window again. Empty, nothing there, just darkness and my own reflection staring back at me. I called the front desk. It rang 7 times before the guy with the ponytail picked up. "Someone's outside my window," I said, my voice shaking. "Room 14, 2nd floor." There was a pause. "Outside your window?" "Yes, I saw someone looking in." Another pause, longer this time. "Room 14's on the 2nd floor. There's nothing outside that window. No balcony, no ladder." "I know what I saw." "I'll check the parking lot," he said, sounding unconvinced. "Stay inside and keep your door locked." I waited by the door, listening for movement outside. After about 10 minutes, I heard footsteps on the stairs, then a knock. "It's Darren from the desk." I opened the door with the chain still on. The guy with the ponytail was standing there, flashlight in hand, looking tired and annoyed. "Checked the whole lot," he said. "There's nobody out here. No ladder, no sign of anyone climbing. You sure you saw something?" "I'm sure." He glanced past me at the window, then back at my face. "Look, you're probably just tired. Long drive, unfamiliar place. Mind plays tricks. Happens all the time." I wanted to argue, but what could I say? That I'd seen a pale face pressed against a second-story window, that it had disappeared the moment I turned on the light. It sounded ridiculous even to me. "You want to switch rooms?" he offered. "I can move you downstairs." I almost said yes, but the thought of packing my stuff and walking through that dark corridor to another room felt worse than staying put. "It's fine, I'll be okay." He shrugged. "Suit yourself, but there's nothing out here." After he left, I pushed the dresser in front of the window. It wasn't heavy enough to block anything serious, but it made me feel slightly better. I left all the lights on and sat in the chair by the door for the rest of the night, dozing off and on. When dawn finally broke, I packed my things and checked out. Darren wasn't at the desk. A younger woman was there instead, reading something on her phone. She barely looked up when I handed her the key. As I walked to my car, I glanced up at room 14. The window was closed, curtains drawn, but there was something on the glass. Smudges right where the face had been pressed. I could see them even from the parking lot, dark marks that looked like they'd been made by dirty hands. I got in my car and drove away without looking back. A few weeks later, I was curious enough to look up the Meadowbrook online. I found some reviews on a travel site. Most of them were what you'd expect. Complaints about cleanliness, outdated rooms, weird smells, but buried in the comments was one from a user named Jeff H, posted about 6 months before my stay. "Stayed in room 14. Had a strange experience with someone tapping on the window in the middle of the night. When I looked, there was a face pressed against the glass. Management said it wasn't possible since the room is on the 2nd floor, but I know what I saw. Won't be returning." I wanted to respond, to tell him I'd seen it too. But what would that prove? That we were both crazy? That something actually was standing outside that window, defying gravity and logic? I never went back to the Meadowbrook. But sometimes, when I'm staying in other motels, other anonymous rooms along other highways, I find myself checking the windows carefully before I go to sleep, making sure the curtains are fully closed, listening for tapping, and I always stay on the 1st floor now. Story 6. The Cascade View Lodge wasn't really a lodge. It was a motel, plain and simple, but I guess lodge sounded more appealing to tourists driving through the Washington Cascades. I'd stopped there in early December on my way to Seattle for a job interview when snow started falling harder than the forecast had predicted. The place was tucked into a valley off Highway 2, surrounded by Douglas firs and not much else. Single story, shaped like an L with maybe a dozen rooms. The office was warm, at least, with a space heater glowing orange in the corner and a coffee maker that looked like it had been there since the 80s. The woman who checked me in was younger than I expected, maybe 30, with blonde hair in a messy bun and a flannel shirt that had seen better days. Her name tag said Vanessa. "Just the one night?" she asked, typing something into an ancient computer. "Yeah, depending on the roads tomorrow." She nodded. "We've got you in room 8. It's at the back, but it's quiet." Room 8 was exactly what I expected from a budget motel in the middle of nowhere. Small, clean enough, with a heater under the window that clanked when I turned it on. The bed looked comfortable, which was all I really cared about after 6 hours of driving through snow. I ordered pizza from a place in the nearest town, picked it up before they closed, and ate it while watching bad television. By 10 p.m., I was ready for sleep. The snow was still falling outside, covering everything in a thick white blanket that muffled sound. I woke up because of the cold. It was the kind of cold that doesn't make sense when you're inside, the kind that makes your breath fog even under blankets. I reached for my phone, 3:24 a.m. The heater was still running, rattling away under the window, but the room felt like a freezer. I got up to check if the door had somehow come open. It was still locked, chain engaged. The window was closed too, though frost had formed on the inside of the glass in intricate patterns. That seemed wrong. How cold did it have to be for frost to form on the inside of a window? I cranked the heater higher and got back into bed, piling on the extra blanket from the closet. I was just starting to warm up when I heard the singing. It was soft, barely audible over the sound of the heater. A woman's voice singing something slow and wordless. Just a melody, rising and falling like a lullaby. I lay there listening, trying to figure out where it was coming from, not from the neighboring rooms. It sounded closer, like it was coming from inside my room, specifically from the bathroom. I got up and approached the bathroom door, which I'd left partially open. The singing continued, steady and sad. I pushed the door fully open and turned on the light. The bathroom was empty, but the mirror over the sink was completely fogged, moisture covering every inch of it. That didn't make sense either. The bathroom was freezing, no hot water running, no reason for the mirror to fog up like that. I reached out to wipe the condensation away and my hand stopped halfway. There was writing on the mirror. Someone had traced words in the fog. "Help me." I backed out of the bathroom, my heart pounding, and the singing stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the voice. I stood there in the middle of the room, staring at the bathroom, trying to decide what to do. I should have left right then. Should have grabbed my things and driven back to the office, demanded another room, or just left entirely. But it was 3 in the morning, snow was still falling, and some stubborn part of me didn't want to admit how scared I was. Instead, I closed the bathroom door and wedged a chair under the handle. I turned on every light in the room and sat on the bed with my back against the wall, phone in hand, waiting for morning. Around 4 a.m., I heard footsteps outside my room. Slow, dragging footsteps like someone walking through deep snow. They stopped outside my door and I heard breathing. Heavy, labored breathing like someone who'd been running. Then a voice. Female, muffled by the door. "Please let me in, it's so cold." I didn't move, didn't respond. Just sat there, gripping my phone, staring at the door. "Please," the voice said again. "I'm freezing, just let me in for a minute." The doorknob turned, testing the lock, rattled once, twice. Then the chain rattled like someone was pulling on it from the outside. "I know you're in there," the voice said, and this time it sounded different, less pleading, more flat. "I can hear you breathing." The chain rattled harder, metal scraping against metal, and I realized with growing horror that it was starting to give. The screws holding the bracket to the doorframe were old, probably loose, and the bracket was shifting with each pull. I grabbed my keys and my wallet, stuffed my feet into my boots without tying them, and went to the window. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely unlock it. The window stuck at first, probably frozen, but I forced it up with both hands and climbed through into the snow. The cold hit me like a wall. I was in my sweatpants and a t-shirt, no coat, and the snow was already a foot deep. I ran around the side of the building toward the office, my feet going numb almost immediately. When I looked back at room 8, I saw something that made me stumble. A figure was standing outside my door, pale and translucent in the falling snow. A woman in a nightgown, her hair hanging wet around her face, one hand still reaching for the door. She turned her head slowly and looked directly at me. Even from that distance, I could see her eyes. They were completely black, empty, like looking into a frozen lake at night. I didn't stop running until I reached the office. The door was locked, lights off. I pounded on the glass until my hands hurt, shouting for Vanessa. A light came on in the back, and eventually Vanessa appeared, looking confused and frightened. She unlocked the door and I practically fell inside. "Someone was trying to get in my room," I said, gasping for breath. "Room 8, there's someone out there." She stared at me, then grabbed a coat and flashlight. "Stay here." She was gone maybe 5 minutes, and when she came back, she looked pale. "There's nobody out there," she said quietly. "But there are footprints, just one set leading from the woods to your door and then back. They don't look," she paused, "they don't look right." "What do you mean?" "They're bare feet," she said, "in the snow, and they're too small, like a child S." She let me stay in the office for the rest of the night, on a couch in the back room that smelled like cigarettes and coffee. She didn't charge me for the room, didn't ask questions. When I checked out at dawn, she handed me my bag, which she'd retrieved from room 8, and told me to drive safely. As I was leaving, I asked her if anything strange had ever happened in room 8 before. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "We try not to rent that room if we can avoid it, but last night we were full, I'm sorry." I drove to Seattle in silence, heater blasting, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that didn't do anything to warm me up. The job interview went fine, but I turned down the offer. I couldn't imagine moving to the Pacific Northwest, couldn't imagine driving that stretch of Highway 2 again. 6 months later, I saw a news article about the Cascade View Lodge. It had burned down in February, origin of the fire unknown. Nobody was hurt, thankfully. The place had been empty. But one detail in the article caught my attention. During the investigation, they'd found something in the crawl space under room 8. The remains of a woman, probably deceased for decades, wearing a nightgown. They hadn't been able to identify her yet. I still think about that voice asking to be let in, about the writing on the mirror and the footprints in the snow. I wonder if she'd been trying to ask for help, or if she'd been trying to pull someone else into whatever cold place she'd been trapped in. I guess I'll never know. But I never stay in room 8 anymore anywhere. And I always make sure I know exactly where the nearest exit is before I go to sleep. Story 7. The Silver Spur Motel sits on the outskirts of Needles, California, right where the Mojave Desert starts to feel truly endless. I stopped there on a road trip from Phoenix to Los Angeles sometime in August, when the heat was so intense it felt like the air itself was trying to hurt you. The motel was old, one of those Route 66 relics that had been built in the 50s and somehow never died. Turquoise and white paint, faded now, with a neon cowboy sign out front that flickered on and off. The parking lot was nearly empty, just my Honda and a pickup truck with Nevada plates. A man with a deeply tanned face and a bolo tie checked me in. He moved slowly, like the heat had sapped all the energy out of him, and when he spoke, his voice was hoarse. "Room 7, he said, sliding a key across the counter. "AC works, water's good, you need anything else, I'm here till midnight." Room 7 was typical desert motel. Adobe-style stucco walls, tile floor, a ceiling fan that wobbled when you turned it on. The AC unit under the window groaned to life and started pumping out cold air that smelled faintly of dust and mildew. I took a cold shower, changed into shorts and a tank top, and lay on the bed, scrolling through my phone. The sun was setting outside, turning the sky orange and purple, and I was thinking about finding dinner when I heard knocking. Not on my door, on the wall. It was rhythmic, almost musical. Knock, knock, pause, knock, 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 pause, knock, knock. It came from the wall shared with room 6, and it went on for maybe 30 seconds before stopping. I waited, listening. Nothing, just the hum of the AC and the distant sound of cars on the highway. Then it started again. Same pattern, knock knock, pause, knock knock knock, pause, knock knock. I got up and pressed my ear to the wall. The knocking was coming from the other side, definitely room 6, but I couldn't hear anything else. No voices, no TV, no footsteps, just knocking. I went outside and walked along the row of rooms. The door to room 6 was closed, curtains drawn, no light visible. I knocked. "Hello, you okay in there?" No answer. The knocking from inside had stopped. I stood there for a moment, feeling stupid, then went back to my room. Maybe it was just someone being weird or a kid playing around. I tried not to think about it and focused on my phone. Around 9 p.m., I walked to a gas station about a quarter mile down the road and bought a sandwich and a bottle of water. The clerk, a teenager with headphones in, barely acknowledged me. I ate in my room while watching something mindless on my laptop. By 11, I was ready for sleep. Brushed my teeth, set an alarm, turned off the lights. The room was dark except for the faint glow of the parking lot light filtering through the curtains. The knocking started again at midnight. Same pattern. Knock, knock, pause, knock, 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 pause, knock, knock. Over and over, steady and relentless. I tried to ignore it, burying my head under the pillow, but it was impossible to block out. The sound seemed to vibrate through the wall, into the bed frame, into my skull. After about 10 minutes, I couldn't take it anymore. I got up, turned on the light, and pounded on the wall. "Hey, knock it off! People are trying to sleep." The knocking stopped immediately. Silence. Complete, absolute silence that was somehow more unsettling than the noise. I stood there, hand still pressed against the wall, listening. Then I felt it. The wall was cold. Not cool, but actually cold, like the surface of a refrigerator. That didn't make sense. It was over 100 degrees outside, the AC was struggling to keep the room tolerable, and yet this wall felt like ice. I pulled my hand away and stared at the spot where I'd been touching. There was a faint outline on the paint. A handprint, not mine. Smaller, with fingers that were too long and thin. I backed away from the wall, my mouth going dry. The handprint started to fade, the moisture or whatever had made it visible evaporating in the dry air. Within seconds it was gone. I grabbed my keys and went to the office. The man with the bolo tie was still there, sitting behind the desk, watching a small TV. "There's something wrong with room 6, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He looked up slowly. "What do you mean?" "Someone's knocking on the wall, won't stop. And the wall is cold, like freezing cold." He stared at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he reached under the counter and pulled out a key. "I'll check it out," he said. We walked to room 6 together. He unlocked the door and pushed it open. The room beyond was dark. He reached inside and flicked the light switch. Room 6 was empty, not just unoccupied, but completely stripped. No bed, no dresser, no furniture at all, just bare walls and a floor covered in dust. It looked like it hadn't been used in years. "Nobody's rented this room in a long time," the man said quietly. "We keep it locked." But I heard knocking. I felt the wall. It was freezing. He didn't respond right away. Just stood there, looking into the empty room with an expression I couldn't read. "Sometimes the plumbing makes noise," he finally said. "Old building, things settle, maybe that's what you heard." I wanted to argue, but what was the point? He clearly wasn't going to tell me what he knew, if he knew anything at all. "Can I switch rooms?" I asked. "All the others are occupied," he said, "except room 6, obviously." I went back to room 7, locked the door, and pushed the dresser against the wall shared with room 6. I didn't sleep. Just lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening for knocking that never came again. When morning finally arrived, I packed my things and left as quickly as possible. The man with the bolo tie wasn't at the desk. A handwritten sign said back in 10 minutes, but I didn't wait, just left the key on the counter and walked out. As I was getting in my car, I glanced at room 6. The door was slightly open, swaying gently in the morning breeze. I didn't go back to check. I got in my car and drove straight to Los Angeles without stopping. A few months later, I was looking at old photos on my phone and found one I'd taken from the Silver Spurs parking lot that evening, capturing the sunset. I'd forgotten about it, but when I zoomed in on the image, I noticed something in the window of room 6. A face, pale and blurry, but definitely a face pressed against the glass from inside, looking directly at the camera. I deleted the photo immediately, but sometimes late at night I still hear that pattern. Knock, knock, pause, knock, 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 pause, knock, knock, and I wonder who was in that empty room knocking on my wall and what they wanted. Story 8. The Mountain View Inn was a lie on 2 fronts. First, there was no mountain view, just a dense wall of spruce trees that pressed close enough to the building that branches scraped the windows when the wind blew. Second, it wasn't really an inn. It was a motel, and not a particularly nice one. I'd ended up there because of car trouble. My transmission had started making a grinding noise somewhere south of Ketchum, Idaho, and by the time I limped into a place called Fairfield, the mechanic told me it would take at least 2 days to get the parts and fix it. The Mountain View was the only accommodation in town. The woman who ran the place was probably in her 70s, with white hair and thick glasses that magnified her eyes. She moved slowly, arthritis maybe, and when she spoke, her voice had that thin, wavering quality of the very elderly. "Room 12, she said, handing me a key. "Upstairs, end of the hall. You need extra towels. There's a closet on the landing." The inn was shaped like a T, with the office and common areas forming the stem and 2 wings of guest rooms extending out. My room was at the far end of the east wing, up a flight of stairs that creaked under every step. Room 12 was small and dated, with wallpaper that might have been fashionable in 1970 and furniture to match. But it was clean, and the bed looked comfortable. A window faced the trees, which had darkened now that the sun had set. I could see my reflection in the glass, the room behind me, the open door to the hallway. I went back downstairs to get dinner at the only restaurant in town, a diner that served breakfast all day and not much else. When I returned to the inn, it was almost 9 p.m., and the common areas were dark except for a lamp in the office where the old woman sat, reading a magazine. I climbed the stairs to my room, unlocked the door, and went inside. Everything was exactly as I'd left it. Except for one thing, the window was open. I was sure I'd closed it before leaving, absolutely certain. But now it was open about 6 inches, cold air pouring in, and the curtains were moving slightly in the breeze. I went over and closed it, locked the latch, told myself I must have been mistaken. Stress from the car trouble, unfamiliar place, easy to forget small details. I got ready for bed, turned off the lights, and settled under the covers. The room was quiet except for the wind in the trees outside and the occasional creak of the building settling. I just started to drift off when I heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, deliberate footsteps moving from one end of the hall toward my room. They stopped outside my door. I lay there, holding my breath, waiting for a knock or the sound of a key in the lock. Nothing, just silence. Then the footsteps moved on, continuing to the end of the hall. I heard a door open and close softly. I exhaled, tried to relax. Just another guest, probably, but something about those footsteps bothered me. They'd sounded wrong somehow. Too slow, too measured, like someone who was trying very hard to be quiet. Around midnight, I woke up to the smell of smoke, not strong, but definitely there, the acrid scent of something burning. I sat up, disoriented, and looked around the room. No smoke visible, no alarm going off, but the smell was unmistakable. I got out of bed and opened the door to the hallway. The smell was stronger here, drifting from somewhere down the hall. I walked toward it, following the scent, until I reached the last door on the left. Room 15. Smoke was seeping out from under the door, thin wisps curling up into the hallway. I knocked, then pounded when there was no answer. "Hey, is someone in there? There's smoke." No response. I tried the doorknob. Locked. I ran back downstairs to the office, where the old woman was now asleep in her chair. I shook her shoulder gently, and she jerked awake, blinking behind her glasses. "There's smoke coming from room 15, I said. "We need to open it." She stared at me for a moment, confused, then seemed to understand. She stood up slowly, grabbed a key ring from the wall, and followed me upstairs. The smoke was thicker now, visible in the hallway. She unlocked the door to room 15 and pushed it open. The room beyond was empty and dark. No fire, no smoke source, nothing. But the smell was overwhelming, choking. I covered my mouth with my shirt and stepped inside, feeling along the wall for a light switch. When the light came on, I saw why the room was empty. It had been gutted by fire at some point. The walls were blackened, the ceiling warped and stained. The bed frame was there, but the mattress was gone, leaving only charred springs. The curtains had been reduced to strips of burnt fabric. "What is this?" I asked, turning to the old woman. She was standing in the doorway, her face pale, eyes wide behind her glasses. "We don't rent this room," she said quietly. "It's been closed for years." "Then why is it smoking?" "It's not," she said. "There's no smoke." I looked back into the room. She was right. The air was clear now, no smoke visible, though the smell lingered. I walked to the window and saw that it was open, just like mine had been. "This happens sometimes," the old woman said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The smell comes back, the smoke, even though the fire was 30 years ago." "What fire?" She hesitated, then sighed. "A guest fell asleep with a cigarette. She didn't make it out." I felt a chill run down my spine. Her room was on fire and she didn't wake up. "They said she was already dead when the fire started," the old woman said. "Heart attack, probably. But by the time the fire department got here, the room was destroyed." I looked at the open window, at the blackened walls, at the empty bed frame. "Why do you keep it like this?" "We tried to renovate," she said. "But things kept happening, tools going missing, workers getting hurt, and the smell always came back no matter what we did. Eventually, we just locked the door and left it. I went back to my room and didn't sleep for the rest of the night. Every time I started to drift off, I'd smell smoke, faint but unmistakable. And I swear I heard footsteps in the hallway, slow and measured, stopping outside room 15. When morning came, I checked out early, told the old woman I'd found another place to stay while my car was being fixed. She didn't argue, just nodded and wished me luck. As I was walking to the mechanic's shop, my phone buzzed with a notification. A photo had automatically backed up to my cloud storage. I opened it, confused since I hadn't taken any photos recently. It was a picture of room 15, taken from inside the room, facing the door. In the doorway, barely visible in the darkness, was a figure. A woman in a nightgown, her face obscured by shadow, standing perfectly still. I hadn't taken that photo. I hadn't even opened my camera app since arriving in Fairfield. I deleted it immediately, but I can still see it when I close my eyes. That figure standing in the doorway, waiting. I wonder sometimes if she's still there in room 15, walking the hallway at night, stopping outside doors. I wonder what she's waiting for. Story 9. The Whispering Palms was the kind of motel that existed solely because it was cheap and located at a highway exit. I'd stopped there during a cross-country drive from Atlanta to San Diego, somewhere in West Texas, where the landscape had flattened into an endless expanse of nothing. It was late afternoon when I pulled in, the sun beating down mercilessly, making the asphalt shimmer. The motel was single-story, painted a color that might have once been yellow but had faded to something closer to beige. A row of scraggly palm trees lined the parking lot, looking more dead than alive. The man at the front desk was watching a baseball game on a small TV, and he barely glanced at me when I asked for a room. $35, he said, cash. I paid, got a key to room 9, and drove around to the back where the room was located. The door stuck when I tried to open it, swollen from heat or age, and I had to put my shoulder into it to get it to budge. Inside was exactly what I expected. Threadbare carpet, a bed with a sagging mattress, a window AC unit that rattled when I turned it on. But it was cheap, and I only needed it for one night. I grabbed my bag from the car, took a lukewarm shower, and lay on the bed in my underwear, trying to cool down. The AC was fighting a losing battle against the Texas heat, but at least the air was moving. Around 7 p.m., I walked to a fast food place about a mile down the road, got a burger and fries, and ate them while sitting on the curb outside. The sun was setting, turning the sky a deep orange, and for a moment the landscape looked almost beautiful. By the time I got back to the motel, it was dark. The parking lot lights were flickering, casting uneven shadows across the cars. I noticed that most of the rooms looked unoccupied, windows dark, no signs of life. I went back to room 9, locked the door, and settled in for the night. I was exhausted from driving, and I fell asleep almost immediately. I woke up to whispering, soft, urgent whispering coming from somewhere close. I lay there in the dark, trying to orient myself, trying to figure out where the sound was coming from. It wasn't from outside. It was inside the room. I reached for the bedside lamp and fumbled for the switch. When the light came on, the room was empty. But the whispering continued, now clearly coming from under the bed. I froze, every muscle in my body tense, staring at the dark space beneath the bed frame. The whispering was rhythmic, like a conversation, but I couldn't make out any words. It just sounded like hushed voices overlapping, urgent. I should have gotten up, should have left the room immediately. Instead, I leaned over the edge of the bed and looked underneath. There was nothing there, just carpet and shadows, but the whispering didn't stop. I pulled back, my heart racing, and the whispering moved. It was now coming from the closet, the door of which was slightly ajar. I watched as the door slowly swung open, revealing darkness inside. The whispering grew louder, more insistent. I could almost make out words now, syllables that sounded like my name repeated over and over in a dozen different voices. I grabbed my keys and my phone and ran to the door, but when I tried to open it, the handle wouldn't turn. The lock was engaged, deadbolt in place, but I hadn't locked it. I was sure I hadn't. I fumbled with the lock, hands shaking, while the whispering grew even louder behind me. Finally, the deadbolt clicked open, and I stumbled out into the parking lot. The air outside was still warm, but it felt cold compared to the suffocating atmosphere of the room. I turned and looked back through the open door. The room appeared normal, empty, silent. I walked to the office, but it was closed, lights off, a sign on the door saying back at 6 a.m. I tried calling the number listed, but it went to voicemail. I spent the rest of the night in my car, doors locked, engine running so I could use the AC. Every time I looked at room 9, I could see the door swinging slightly, even though there was no wind. At dawn, I grabbed my bag from the room, threw it in the car, and left without checking out. I drove for 3 hours straight before I felt comfortable enough to stop for coffee. A few weeks later, I was telling the story to a friend, trying to make it sound amusing rather than terrifying. She Googled the whispering palms while I was talking, and her expression changed. "Hey," she said, turning her phone toward me. "Is this the place?" It was a news article from 5 years ago. The Whispering Palms Motel. A family of 4 had been found dead in room 9, carbon monoxide poisoning from a faulty heater. The article mentioned that the motel had been temporarily closed for inspections but had reopened after repairs. I looked at the photo accompanying the article. It showed the outside of room 9, the door marked with police tape, palm trees visible in the background. I never told my friend what I heard that night. Never mentioned that the voices under the bed had sounded like children. Never explained that when I'd looked back at room 9 from my car, I'd seen shadows moving behind the curtains. Shapes that looked like they were pressed against the window, watching me leave. I don't drive through West Texas anymore. I take the northern route now, even though it adds hours to the trip. Because sometimes, late at night when I'm alone, I still hear whispering. And I swear it sounds like voices calling my name, asking me to come back. Story 10. The Redwood Motor Court sat in Northern California, just off Highway 101, surrounded by old-growth redwoods that made the place feel like it existed in permanent twilight. I'd stopped there in September, escaping the heat of the Central Valley, and the temperature drop as I drove into the trees was almost shocking. The motel was rustic, built to look like a series of log cabins arranged in a semicircle around a gravel courtyard. Each cabin had a small porch with rocking chairs, and the whole place had this deliberately nostalgic vibe, like it was trying to evoke some idealized version of the past. A young guy with a beard and a flannel shirt checked me in, very friendly, very enthusiastic about the local hiking trails and breweries. He gave me a key to cabin 5, which he said had the best view of the trees. The cabin was nice, I had to admit. Wood-paneled walls, a stone fireplace, a comfortable-looking bed with a patchwork quilt. The bathroom had one of those clawfoot tubs, and there was a basket of complimentary soap and shampoo that smelled like pine and mint. I unpacked, took a shower, and was about to head out to find dinner when I noticed something carved into the windowsill. It was a message, scratched into the wood with something sharp. The letters were small, uneven, like they'd been made in a hurry. "Don't stay after dark." I stared at it, running my finger over the carved letters. They weren't fresh. The wood inside the grooves had darkened with age, meaning this had been here for a while, years maybe. I told myself it was a prank, something a bored guest had done to mess with future visitors, but something about it made my skin prickle. The urgency of the message, the way the letters got shakier toward the end. I went to the office and asked the bearded guy about it. "Oh yeah," he said, laughing. "Someone carved that a few years back. We tried to sand it out, but it's deep. Honestly, we just leave it now. Adds character, right? Do you know who did it?" He shrugged. "No idea. Probably just someone screwing around." I went back to cabin 5, still unsettled. It was almost 6 p.m. now, the sun dropping below the tree line and the courtyard was falling into shadow. I decided to skip dinner in town and just order delivery, stay in for the night. By 7, it was fully dark. Not just night dark, but deep forest dark, the kind where you can't see your hand in front of your face. The lights in the cabin helped, but every time I looked out the window, all I could see was my own reflection against a wall of blackness. I was eating Chinese food and watching something on my laptop when I heard the first knock. It was soft, barely audible, coming from the front door. I paused the video and listened. Nothing. Then another knock, slightly louder. I went to the door and looked through the peephole. The porch was dark, no light, nothing visible. I turned on the porch light and looked again. A woman was standing there. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with long dark hair and a white dress that looked old-fashioned, like something from the 40s. She was staring directly at the peephole, her eyes wide, her mouth moving like she was speaking, though I couldn't hear her through the door. I opened the door a crack, keeping the chain engaged. "Can I help you?" She didn't respond, just kept staring, her mouth moving silently. Then she raised her hand and pointed behind me into the cabin. I turned to look, and when I turned back, she was gone. I stepped out onto the porch, looked around the courtyard. Empty, no sign of her anywhere. The other cabins were dark, no lights, no movement. I went back inside, locked the door, engaged the chain. My hands were shaking. Something about her had been deeply wrong. The way she'd moved, the way she'd stared, the expression on her face. It hadn't looked quite human. Around 9 p.m., I heard footsteps on the porch. Slow, creaking footsteps moving from one end to the other, back and forth, back and forth. I looked through the peephole, nothing there, but the footsteps continued, accompanied now by the sound of rocking chairs moving, like someone was sitting down and standing up repeatedly. I called the office. It rang and rang before going to voicemail. The footsteps stopped around 10. The silence that followed was worse. I sat on the bed, fully dressed, phone in hand, debating whether to just get in my car and leave. That's when I heard the scratching. It was coming from the bathroom, soft at first, then louder, like fingernails dragging across the wall or something sharp scraping against wood. I approached the bathroom slowly, every instinct screaming at me to leave. The door was closed. I hadn't closed it. I never closed bathroom doors when I was alone. I reached for the handle, then stopped. The scratching had stopped, replaced by a new sound. Whispering, soft, urgent whispering coming from the other side of the door. Leave, leave now, before they come inside. I backed away from the door, grabbed my bag and ran out of the cabin. I didn't lock it, didn't even close the door properly. Just threw my stuff in the car and drove out of there as fast as the gravel would allow. In my rearview mirror, I saw the woman in the white dress standing in front of cabin 5, watching me leave. And behind her, barely visible in the shadows, were other figures. Dozens of them, standing perfectly still among the trees. I drove until I reached the next town, checked into a chain hotel with bright lights and security cameras, and didn't sleep for the rest of the night. 2 days later, I looked up the Redwood Motor Court online. The website was gone. When I called the number listed on Google, it had been disconnected. I even tried to find it on satellite imagery, but the coordinates just showed an empty clearing surrounded by trees. I still have the photo I took of the message on the windowsill saved on my phone. Sometimes I look at it and wonder who carved it. If they got out before dark like the voice in the bathroom told me to. And I wonder how many people didn't. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed these stories, hit that like button and subscribe for more tales from America's forgotten highways and isolated corners. Let me know in the comments which story unsettled you most, and share this with your friends who love a good scare. Until next time, stay safe out there, and maybe think twice before pulling into that cheap motel on a dark road in the middle of nowhere.